The desert heat hit Sarah Martinez like a wall as she stepped off the transport helicopter. Sand whipped across the makeshift landing zone, stinging her face through her protective gear. She adjusted her medical bag and followed the other soldiers toward the forward operating base that would become her home for the next 18 months. Sarah had dreamed of being a combat medic since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her grandfather struggle with injuries from Vietnam. He never talked much about the war, but she saw how he winced when he thought nobody was looking. She made a promise to herself then that she would help soldiers the way nobody had been able to help him. Now at 24, she was finally living that dream. The Army had put her through intensive medical training, teaching her to save lives under pressure. She could stop bleeding, treat shock, and perform emergency procedures in conditions that would make most people panic. What she hadn't expected was how different the reality would be from her training. The base buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared for their next mission. Sarah noticed how they moved with purpose, each person knowing their role. She wondered where she would fit in. Her commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, met her at the medical tent that would serve as their field hospital. "Martinez, welcome to paradise," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hope you're ready to work. Things get busy around here real quick." The medical tent was larger than she had imagined, with equipment that looked both sophisticated and battle-worn. Other medics moved between patients, their movements efficient and calm. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she realized this was where she would spend most of her time. Her first week passed in a blur of learning routines and getting to know her team. The other medics were friendly but focused, understanding that their work meant the difference between life and death. Sarah threw herself into the work, determined to prove she belonged. The base was located in a strategic position, surrounded by mountains that provided both protection and potential hiding spots for enemies. Sarah learned to recognize the different sounds that filled their days. Helicopters meant wounded soldiers were coming in or supplies were arriving. The distant rumble of artillery meant operations were ongoing. The sudden silence meant everyone needed to be ready for anything. During her second week, Sarah experienced her first real emergency. A convoy had hit an improvised explosive device about 10 miles from base. The radio crackled with urgent voices as details came through. 3 wounded, 1 critical. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she helped prepare the medical tent. The helicopter arrived in a cloud of dust and noise. Sarah watched the experienced medics leap into action as stretchers were carried in. The first 2 soldiers had minor injuries, cuts and bruises from being thrown around in their vehicle. But the third soldier was unconscious, blood seeping through his uniform. "Martinez, over here," Captain Rodriguez called out. "I need you to assist." Sarah moved quickly to his side, her training taking over as she helped assess the soldier's injuries. His name was Private Johnson, barely 20 years old. Shrapnel had torn through his leg, and he was losing blood fast. Sarah worked alongside the captain, applying pressure bandages and starting an IV line. For the next 2 hours, they worked to stabilize Johnson. Sarah found herself moving with confidence she didn't know she possessed. Her hands were steady as she followed the captain's instructions, anticipating what he needed before he asked for it. When they finally got Johnson stable enough for transport to a larger medical facility, Captain Rodriguez pulled her aside. "Good work today, Martinez. You've got steady hands and a clear head under pressure. Those are the qualities that save lives out here." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but it was mixed with something else. As she watched Johnson being loaded onto the medical helicopter, she couldn't stop thinking about the soldiers who had caused his injuries. They were out there somewhere, probably planning their next attack. That night she lay in her bunk listening to the distant sounds of the base settling down for the evening. Guard posts remained active, soldiers taking turns watching for threats. Sarah found herself wondering what it would be like to be one of those soldiers, the ones who went out on patrol and faced the enemy directly. She had always been fascinated by marksmanship. Growing up in Texas, her father had taught her to shoot when she was 10 years old. They would spend weekend mornings at the range, her father patiently correcting her stance and breathing. By the time she was in high school, she was one of the best shots in her county. But becoming a medic had always been the plan. Saving lives, not taking them. Yet as she thought about Private Johnson and the countless other soldiers who would come through their medical tent, she began to wonder if there might be another way to protect them. The next morning brought news that Johnson was recovering well at the military hospital. Sarah felt relieved, but she also felt something new stirring inside her. a desire to do more than just patch up the wounded after the fact. She wanted to prevent them from getting wounded in the first place. During her lunch break, she found herself walking toward the base's shooting range. A few soldiers were there practicing with their weapons. Sarah watched them for a while, noting their techniques and remembering her own training. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Davis, noticed her interest. "You shoot, Doc?" he asked, using the nickname that medics often earned. "A little," Sarah replied modestly. "Want to give it a try? Always good for medics to stay sharp with their weapons." Sarah picked up one of the rifles, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. She lined up her shot, controlled her breathing the way her father had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit dead center of the target at 200 yards. Sergeant Davis whistled low. "That's not a little, Doc. That's some serious shooting." Word spread quickly around the base about the medic who could shoot. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself spending more time at the range. Other soldiers began asking her for tips, and she discovered she enjoyed teaching them almost as much as she enjoyed shooting herself. But it was during her third week that everything changed. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was operating in their area, someone responsible for coordinating attacks on American forces, someone who needed to be stopped before more soldiers like Private Johnson got hurt. As Sarah cleaned her rifle that evening, she made a decision that would change the course of her military career forever. Sarah stood outside Captain Rodriguez's office, her heart pounding as she rehearsed what she wanted to say. 3 weeks of treating wounded soldiers had crystallized something inside her. She wanted to do more than heal the damage after it was done. She wanted to prevent it from happening in the first place. "Come in." "Martinez," the captain called before she could knock. Sarah entered the small office, noting the maps covering the walls and the stack of reports on his desk. Captain Rodriguez looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from making life-and-death decisions every day. "Sir, I'd like to request a transfer to sniper training," Sarah said, deciding to be direct. Captain Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork, surprised. "You want to what now?" "I've been thinking about it since Private Johnson came in," Sarah explained. "I'm good at saving lives, but what if I could prevent soldiers from getting wounded in the first place? What if I could take out the threats before they hurt our people?" The captain leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Martinez, you're one of the best medics I've seen. You've got natural instincts and steady hands. Why would you want to give that up?" Sarah had expected this question. "Because I can make a bigger difference, sir. I've seen what these snipers do to our soldiers. But I've also seen what our snipers can do to protect them. Sergeant Davis told me about the base's shooting competitions. I've been participating, and apparently I have some natural ability." "Natural ability is one thing," Captain Rodriguez said. "Being a sniper is something else entirely. It's not just about shooting targets at a range." "I understand that, sir. But I want to try. I need to try." The captain was quiet for a long moment, then picked up his phone. "Davis, get in here." Within minutes, Sergeant Davis appeared at the door. "Tell me about Martinez's shooting," the captain said without preamble. Davis glanced at Sarah, then back at the captain. "Sir, I've never seen anything like it. Yesterday she put 10 rounds through the same hole at 400 yards. Wind was gusting too. Most of our designated marksmen can't shoot that well." Captain Rodriguez drummed his fingers on his desk. "The thing is, Martinez, we need medics. Good medics, and you're exceptional at it. Sir, I've trained 2 other medics since I've been here. They're both capable of handling the workload. And if something happens to our current snipers, we'll have wounded soldiers and no way to protect them from future attacks." The captain considered this. Sarah could see him weighing the options, calculating risks and benefits. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. But understand this, sniper school is brutal. The washout rate is over 70%. If you don't make it through, you come back here as a medic. No complaints, no second chances." "Understood, sir." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself on another transport, this time heading to the Army's sniper school at Fort Benning. The landscape below changed from desert to forest as they flew east. Sarah stared out the window, wondering if she was making the right choice. Sniper school was everything the captain had warned her about and more. The instructors were hard, demanding perfection in every aspect of training. Physical fitness, marksmanship, fieldcraft, observation skills. Everything had to be mastered to an exceptional level. Sarah was one of only 3 women in her class of 48 students. Some of the male soldiers clearly had doubts about her abilities, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. She ignored them, focusing instead on the training. The first week was basic marksmanship, refining shooting techniques that would serve as the foundation for everything else. Sarah's natural abilities quickly became apparent to the instructors. While other students struggled with wind calculations and range estimation, she seemed to instinctively understand how to adjust her shots. Staff Sergeant Williams, the lead instructor, was a veteran sniper with multiple deployments. He was known for being tough but fair, pushing students to their limits while recognizing genuine talent when he saw it. Martinez, he called out during a particularly challenging shooting exercise. Front and center, Sarah approached, uncertain what to expect. The exercise involved hitting targets at varying distances while dealing with changing wind conditions. Most students were struggling to hit even half their targets. "Show them how it's done," Williams said, handing her a rifle. Sarah settled into position, studying the targets through her scope. She took her time, reading the wind indicators and calculating distances. Then she began shooting, moving methodically from target to target. When she finished, she had hit every single one. The range fell silent. Even the students who had been skeptical of her abilities stared in amazement. "That," Staff Sergeant Williams announced to the class, "is what perfect marksmanship looks like. Study her technique because most of you will never shoot that well." But marksmanship was only part of sniper training. The students also had to master camouflage and concealment, learning to become invisible in any environment. They practiced moving silently through different types of terrain, setting up hides that could go undetected for days. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for this as well. Her small frame made it easier for her to fit into tight spaces, and her medical training had taught her patience and attention to detail. While other students grew frustrated with the slow, methodical nature of sniper work, Sarah found it calming. The psychological aspects of sniper training were perhaps the most challenging. The instructors made it clear that being a sniper meant taking lives, often from great distances. They had to be certain that each student could handle that responsibility. Sarah thought about this during the long hours of training. She had become a medic to save lives, and now she was training to take them. But every time she questioned her decision, she remembered Private Johnson and the countless other wounded soldiers she had treated. If she could prevent even one soldier from being wounded, it would be worth it. The weeks passed in a blur of intensive training. Students dropped out regularly, unable to meet the demanding standards. By the halfway point, only 22 of the original 48 remained. Sarah was not only still there, but she was consistently ranked among the top performers in the class. It was during the 6th week that she faced her biggest challenge yet. The final field exercise would test everything they had learned, combining marksmanship, fieldcraft, and tactical knowledge in a realistic scenario. Sarah lay motionless in her carefully constructed hide, waiting for her target to appear. She had been in position for over 8 hours, moving only when absolutely necessary. Her spotter, a soldier named Private Collins, whispered range and wind information as they tracked their assigned target through the scope. The target finally appeared, an instructor playing the role of an enemy sniper. He was over 800 yards away, partially concealed behind cover. Sarah had one shot to prove herself worthy of graduation. She controlled her breathing, calculated the wind drift, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the training area, and through her scope she saw the instructor raise his hand to signal a hit. "Outstanding shot, Martinez," Collins whispered, right through the 10 ring. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to move to their extraction point, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced as a medic. She was good at this, perhaps better than she had ever been at anything else. But graduation was still 2 weeks away, and she knew the hardest tests were yet to come. The final 2 weeks of sniper school pushed Sarah beyond anything she had experienced. The instructors designed scenarios that tested not just shooting ability, but decision-making under extreme pressure. Sarah found herself crawling through swamps at midnight, setting up shots in driving rain, and maintaining position while insects crawled across her face for hours. On the second to last day, Staff Sergeant Williams called her into his office. Sarah entered, wondering if something was wrong. The sergeant's expression was unreadable as he gestured for her to sit down. "Martinez, I've been doing this for 15 years, he began. "I've trained hundreds of snipers, and I've seen maybe a dozen with natural ability like yours." Sarah waited, unsure if this was praise or leading to bad news. "Your marksmanship scores are the highest in your class." Your fieldcraft is exceptional. You have the patience and mental discipline that most soldiers take years to develop." He paused, studying her face. "But I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you ready to kill someone?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing for weeks. In all her medical training, everything had been about preserving life. Now she was preparing to take it. "Sir, I've thought about this every day since I got here," Sarah said slowly. "I know it sounds contradictory coming from someone who was a medic, but I've seen what happens when we can't protect our soldiers. I've held dying men in my arms who were killed by enemy snipers. If I can prevent that from happening to even one soldier, then yes, I'm ready." Williams nodded slowly. "Good answer. Because tomorrow you're going to face the final test and it's not what you think." The next morning, Sarah and the remaining 18 students were transported to a remote training area. They were told this would be their final shooting exercise before graduation. Sarah felt confident as she prepared her equipment, having consistently outperformed her classmates throughout the course. But when they arrived at the shooting position, something was different. Instead of the usual paper targets, there were realistic mannequins dressed in enemy uniforms, positioned in scenarios that looked like actual combat situations. "This is your final test," Staff Sergeant Williams announced. "You'll be given intelligence about enemy positions threatening a convoy of wounded soldiers. Your job is to eliminate the threats and allow the convoy to pass safely. You have 1 hour to complete the mission." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was as close to real combat as training could get. She studied the intelligence briefing, noting the positions of 3 enemy snipers threatening the convoy route. Each target would require a different approach and shooting angle. She began by identifying the best position for her first shot. The target was positioned behind a low wall with only a small portion visible. Sarah calculated the distance at 650 yards, with a slight crosswind that would affect her bullet's trajectory. Moving carefully to avoid detection by the role-playing instructors who were acting as enemy spotters, Sarah found a concealed position with a clear line of sight. She settled into her shooting stance, controlled her breathing, and lined up the shot. The mannequin's head disappeared in a cloud of stuffing as her bullet found its mark. 1 down, 2 to go. The second target was more challenging. Positioned on elevated ground at nearly 900 yards, it required Sarah to shoot at an upward angle, while accounting for the effects of gravity and air density. She spent precious minutes calculating the shot, knowing she would only get 1 chance. Her bullet struck the target center mass, and she immediately began moving to position for the third shot. Time was running short, and this target would be the most difficult yet. The final enemy sniper was positioned over 1,000 yards away, partially concealed and at the maximum effective range of her rifle. Sarah found a stable shooting position and studied the target through her scope. At this distance, even a slight error in calculation would result in a complete miss. She took her time despite the pressure of the ticking clock. Wind, distance, elevation, temperature, every factor had to be considered. Finally satisfied with her calculations, she squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the target fall backward, confirming the hit. 3 targets eliminated with 3 shots with 15 minutes to spare. "Exercise complete," came the voice over the radio. "All threats neutralized. Convoy is clear to proceed." As Sarah packed up her equipment, she felt a mixture of pride and something else she couldn't quite identify. She had just completed the most challenging test of her military career, proving she had the skills to be an elite sniper. But she also realized there was no going back to her old life as a medic. The graduation ceremony 2 days later was simple but meaningful. Of the original 48 students, only 16 had successfully completed the course. Sarah graduated second in her class, earning recognition as an expert marksman and qualified sniper. Staff Sergeant Williams shook her hand as he presented her with her sniper badge. "You're going places, Martinez. Just remember, with great skill comes great responsibility. Use these abilities wisely." After graduation, Sarah expected to return to her original unit in the desert. Instead, she received orders for a new assignment. She was being transferred to a special operations unit that worked closely with Navy SEALs and other elite forces. The flight to her new base took her across the country to a classified location on the East Coast. As the plane descended, Sarah could see a sprawling military complex surrounded by dense forest. This would be her home for advanced training that would prepare her for the most dangerous and sensitive missions. Her new commanding officer, Major Thompson, met her at the airfield. He was a tall, lean man with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in special operations. "Welcome to the unit, Martinez," he said as they walked toward the main building. "We've been following your progress through sniper school. Impressive scores. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. What you learned at Fort Benning was just the beginning. Here, we're going to teach you things they don't cover in regular sniper training: advanced techniques, specialized equipment, and how to work with the most elite units in the military." The next several months were unlike anything Sarah had experienced. She learned urban sniping techniques, shooting from helicopters and boats, and how to use specialized equipment for extreme long-range shooting. She also learned how to work as part of a team with special operations forces. The training was physically and mentally demanding, but Sarah thrived in the environment. Her instructors noted her exceptional ability to remain calm under pressure and her natural talent for reading environmental conditions that affected long-range shooting. It was during her 4th month at the new unit that Major Thompson called her into his office. "With a special assignment, Martinez. We've received a request from a SEAL team operating in hostile territory. They need sniper support for a high-priority mission. The target is a terrorist leader responsible for multiple attacks on American forces." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This would be her first real combat mission as a sniper. "The SEALs specifically requested you based on your training scores and background. They need someone who can make an extremely difficult shot under challenging conditions." The major paused, studying her face. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah thought about her journey from combat medic to sniper, about all the wounded soldiers she had treated and the intensive training she had completed. She was as ready as she could ever be. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." The briefing room was dimly lit, filled with maps, satellite images, and tactical displays that showed every detail of the target area. Sarah sat alongside 6 Navy SEALs, their faces serious as they studied the mission parameters. This was her first time working with America's most elite special operations unit, and she could feel their eyes evaluating her. Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison led the briefing. He was a veteran SEAL with multiple deployments, his voice calm and professional as he outlined the mission. "Our target is Ahmed Qasim, a high-value terrorist who's been coordinating attacks against our forces for the past 18 months, Harrison began. "Intelligence indicates he'll be meeting with his cell leaders at this compound tomorrow night." Sarah studied the satellite images of the target location. The compound was situated in a valley surrounded by steep hills, with multiple buildings and limited access routes. It would be a challenging environment for any operation. "The problem is the location," Harrison continued. "The compound is heavily fortified and our target rarely exposes himself. When he does, it's usually for just a few seconds as he moves between buildings." One of the SEALs, Petty Officer Rodriguez, pointed to the topographical map. "Our insertion point is here, about 2 miles from the target. We'll move in during darkness and establish overwatch positions." Harrison turned to Sarah. "Martinez, this is where you come in. Based on the intelligence, there's only one position that offers a clear line of sight to the compound's main building. It's on this ridgeline, approximately 1,200 yards from the target." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. 1,200 yards was at the extreme range of her rifle's effectiveness, especially under field conditions. Any number of factors could affect the shot at that distance. "Sir, what's the time window for the shot?" she asked. "Intelligence suggests Qasim will move from the main building to the communications bunker at approximately 2,300 hours. Based on surveillance footage, he's usually exposed for no more than 8 to 10 seconds. 8 seconds. Sarah had made shots at that distance during training, but never with such a narrow window of opportunity, and never with lives depending on her accuracy. Chief Petty Officer Mitchell, the team's senior enlisted man, spoke up. "Martinez, I've read your training reports. Your instructors say you're one of the best shots they've ever seen. But this isn't a training exercise. Miss this shot and Qasim disappears for months, maybe forever." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand the stakes, Chief. I won't miss." The next 18 hours were spent in final preparations. Sarah meticulously checked her rifle, a precision instrument capable of accurate shots at extreme range. She studied weather reports, calculating how wind, temperature, and humidity might affect her bullet's trajectory. Every detail mattered when shooting at such distances. The insertion began at sunset. Sarah and the 6 SEALs loaded into a helicopter that would take them to a landing zone 5 miles from the target. From there, they would move on foot through mountainous terrain to reach their positions. The helicopter flight was tense and quiet. Sarah watched the landscape pass below, noting landmarks that would help with navigation. The SEALs checked their equipment one final time, their movements efficient and practiced. 5 minutes out, the pilot announced over the intercom. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the helicopter began its descent. This was it, her first real combat mission as a sniper. Everything she had trained for over the past months came down to the next few hours. The landing zone was a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. The helicopter touched down just long enough for the team to exit before lifting off again, disappearing into the night sky. Suddenly, Sarah found herself in complete darkness, relying on night vision equipment to navigate the terrain. Lieutenant Commander Harrison took point as they began their movement toward the target. The team moved in single file, maintaining noise discipline as they navigated through rocky terrain and thick vegetation. Sarah carried her rifle and additional equipment, feeling the weight of responsibility with every step. The 2-mile approach took over 3 hours. The team had to avoid several patrol routes and observation posts that intelligence had identified. Sarah was impressed by the SEALs' professionalism and tactical expertise as they guided the team safely through enemy territory. Finally, they reached the ridgeline that would serve as Sarah's shooting position. The compound was visible in the valley below, its buildings outlined against the night sky. Through her scope, Sarah could see guards moving around the perimeter and lights in several windows. "Overwatch position established," Harrison whispered into his radio. "Sniper is in position." Sarah began setting up her shooting position, using the natural terrain to create a stable platform for her rifle. She arranged her equipment carefully, ensuring everything was within easy reach. The night was clear, with minimal wind, ideal conditions for long-range shooting. "Range to target building is 1,180 yards, she reported quietly. "Wind is light and variable, 2 to 3 miles per hour from the southwest." "Copy that," Harrison replied. "Intelligence reports target is still inside main building. Estimated movement in approximately 30 minutes. The wait began. Sarah settled into her position, controlling her breathing and heart rate. She had learned during training that the waiting was often the hardest part of a sniper's job. The adrenaline had to be managed, focus maintained despite the pressure. Through her scope, she watched the compound for any sign of movement. Guards rotated positions regularly, and she could see figures moving behind lit windows. But there was no sign of their primary target. "Movement in the main building," Rodriguez reported from his observation position. "Multiple figures, but no positive identification yet." Sarah adjusted her scope, scanning the windows of the main building for any sign of Qasim. Intelligence photos had given her a clear image of what he looked like, but identifying him at this distance and in low light would be challenging. "Stand by," Harrison whispered. "Intelligence reports target is preparing to move." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment everything had been building toward. She controlled her breathing, settling the crosshairs of her scope on the path between the main building and the communications bunker. "Target building door is opening," she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. A figure emerged from the building, moving quickly across the open ground. Through her scope, Sarah could see it was a man matching Qasim's description, but she needed to be absolutely certain before taking the shot. "Positive identification confirmed," Rodriguez called out. "That's our target." Sarah tracked the figure through her scope as he moved toward the communications bunker. The range was exactly as calculated and the wind conditions remained favorable. She had a clear shot, but the target was moving quickly. Taking a deep breath, Sarah led the target slightly to account for his movement, squeezed the trigger gently, and sent the bullet on its way across the 1,200 yards between her position and the target. The shot echoed across the valley, and through her scope Sarah saw the target fall to the ground. "Motionless, target down," she reported, her voice calm and professional. But their mission was far from over. The gunshot had alerted the compound's defenders, and within seconds, the entire area erupted into chaos as guards began searching for the source of the shot. The compound below erupted into chaos as guards rushed toward where their leader had fallen. Searchlights swept across the mountainside, probing for the source of the shot. Sarah remained motionless in her position, knowing that any movement could give away their location. "Nice shot, Martinez," Chief Mitchell whispered through the radio, "but now we've got bigger problems." Through her scope, Sarah could see armed men spreading out from the compound, beginning to search the surrounding hills in a systematic pattern. The team had planned for this contingency, but actually executing an escape under enemy fire was vastly different from practicing it in training. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice came through her earpiece, calm despite the circumstances. "All positions, prepare for extraction. Martinez, pack your gear. We're moving in 2 minutes." Sarah began breaking down her shooting position, working quickly but carefully to ensure she left no evidence behind. Her rifle went into its case and she gathered the spent brass casing from her shot. Even in the stress of potential combat, her training took over. "Movement on the eastern approach," Rodriguez reported. "Approximately 12 hostiles moving up the ridge line toward our position." Sarah felt her pulse spike. The enemy had triangulated the general direction of her shot more quickly than expected. They would have to move fast to avoid being surrounded. "Roger that," Harrison responded. "All call signs, execute extraction route Alpha. Move now." The team began moving down the backside of the ridge, using the natural terrain to mask their movement from the searching spotlights. Sarah found herself in the middle of the formation, protected by the SEALs' tactical expertise as they navigated through the darkness. The escape route took them through a steep ravine that would provide cover from observation but would also channel them into a predictable path. It was a calculated risk, but their best option given the circumstances. "Contact front," came the urgent whisper from the point man. 4 hostiles blocking the ravine exit. The team immediately went to ground using whatever cover was available. Sarah found herself behind a large boulder, her heart pounding as she realized they were trapped between the searching teams behind them and the blocking force ahead. Harrison made a quick, tactical decision. "Mitchell, Rodriguez, take them out quietly. Martinez, cover our 6. Watch for the search teams." Sarah turned to face back up the ravine, scanning through her rifle scope for any sign of pursuit. Her role had suddenly shifted from sniper to security, and she had to adapt quickly to the changing situation. The 2 SEALs moved forward with practiced stealth, and within minutes Sarah heard the barely audible sounds of close-quarters combat. Then Mitchell's voice came through the radio. "Path is clear, move." The team resumed their movement through the ravine, but Sarah could see lights beginning to appear on the ridge behind them. The search teams were getting closer and they were running out of time before being discovered. "Extraction point is 800 meters ahead," Harrison reported. "Helicopter will be on station in 15 minutes. 800 meters might as well have been 8 miles if they were discovered before reaching it. Sarah could hear voices echoing through the ravine behind them, getting closer with each passing minute. They reached a point where the ravine opened into a wider valley, offering multiple routes but also exposing them to observation from the ridgelines on either side. Harrison held up his hand, signaling the team to stop while he evaluated their options. "We've got thermal scopes sweeping the valley floor," he whispered. "They're trying to pick up our heat signatures." Sarah realized that their body heat would show up clearly against the cool mountain air, making them easy targets for anyone with thermal imaging equipment. They needed a new plan. "There," Rodriguez pointed to a small cluster of buildings about 400 meters away. "If we can reach those structures, the residual heat will mask our signatures." It was risky. Moving across open ground would expose them to direct fire if they were spotted, but staying in the ravine meant certain discovery by the thermal scopes. "We move fast and low," Harrison decided. "Martinez, you're in the middle. If contact is made, the team will bound by elements while you provide precision fire support." Sarah nodded, understanding her role. As the team's sniper, she would use her long-range capabilities to suppress enemy positions while the SEALs maneuvered. They began moving across the open ground in short rushes, using whatever minimal cover was available. Sarah's equipment felt heavier with each bound, but adrenaline kept her moving despite the physical demands. Halfway to the buildings, a spotlight suddenly illuminated their position. Someone on the ridge had spotted them, and within seconds automatic weapons fire began impacting around their position. "Contact right," Harrison shouted. "Bound by teams." The SEALs immediately began their practiced battle drill, with half the team providing covering fire while the other half moved to better positions. Sarah found herself behind a low stone wall, bullets chipping away at the rocks just inches from her head. "Martinez, can you identify the firing positions?" Harrison called out. Sarah raised her rifle, scanning the ridgeline through her scope. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions approximately 600 yards away. "I've got 3 positions on the eastern ridge," she reported. "Range 600 meters. Take them out," Harrison ordered. This was different from her training shots at stationary targets. These enemies were actively shooting at her and her teammates, and she had to make precise shots while under fire herself. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her first target, and squeezed the trigger. The leftmost muzzle flash disappeared. 1 down. She shifted to the second position, adjusted for the slight wind that had picked up, and fired again. Another direct hit. The third position had stopped firing, probably realizing they were being targeted by a sniper. But Sarah could still see movement through her scope. She waited patiently, knowing the enemy would eventually expose themselves. There, a figure moving between rocks. Sarah led the target slightly and fired her third shot. The movement stopped abruptly. "All positions neutralized," she reported. "Outstanding shooting," Mitchell called back. "Now let's get out of here before their friends show up." The team resumed movement toward the buildings, reaching them just as Sarah heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Their extraction was arriving on schedule, but they still had to reach the landing zone without being intercepted. The abandoned buildings provided excellent concealment as they moved through them toward the extraction point. Sarah could see the helicopter approaching in the distance, its navigation lights barely visible against the night sky. "Landing zone is clear," Rodriguez reported from his advanced position. "No hostile activity detected." They reached the extraction point just as the helicopter flared for landing. Sarah ran toward the aircraft with the rest of the team, feeling a mixture of relief and accomplishment as they climbed aboard. As the helicopter lifted off and banked away from the mountains, Sarah looked back at the compound where their mission had begun. Lights were still visible as the enemy continued their futile search for the team that had eliminated their leader. Lieutenant Commander Harrison sat down next to her as they flew toward safety. "That was exceptional work back there, Martinez. Both the long-range shot and the tactical shooting during our extraction." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but also a sense of completion. She had successfully transitioned from combat medic to expert sniper, proving herself capable of operating with the military's most elite units. "Thank you, sir. I'm just glad we all made it out safely." "The SEALs don't often work with outside personnel," Harrison continued, "but after tonight I think you'll find a lot of teams requesting your support." As the helicopter carried them toward their base, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From treating wounded soldiers in a desert medical tent, to eliminating high-value targets alongside Navy SEALs, she had found her true calling in the military. But she had no idea that her most challenging mission was still ahead of her. 3 months after her successful mission with the SEALs, Sarah found herself in a situation she never could have imagined. The recommendation from Lieutenant Commander Harrison had led to an assignment that would test everything she had learned and push her skills beyond anything she thought possible. Major Thompson called her into his office on a gray Monday morning, his expression more serious than usual. On his desk were classified folders marked with security classifications Sarah had never seen before. "Martinez, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," he began. "We've received intelligence about a terrorist cell planning a major attack on American soil. The threat is imminent and conventional response options are limited." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. An attack on American soil meant innocent civilians were at risk, potentially thousands of them. The cell leader is a former military sniper who's been training other terrorists in advanced shooting techniques, Major Thompson continued. "Intelligence indicates they're planning to use sniper tactics as part of a coordinated attack on a major American city." The major opened one of the classified folders, revealing surveillance photos of a man in his 40s with distinctive facial scars. "This is Hassan al-Rashid, former Iraqi military trained by Soviet instructors. He's considered one of the most dangerous snipers alive today." Sarah studied the photos, noting the man's calculating eyes and professional bearing. Even in surveillance pictures, he looked like someone who had seen extensive combat. "Al-Rashid has been operating a training camp in the mountains of a country that won't allow us to conduct traditional military operations," the major explained. "We need someone who can infiltrate the area, locate the camp, and eliminate the threat before the planned attack." "Sir, when you say eliminate the threat, I mean al-Rashid and his entire training operation. This is a target elimination mission with strategic implications for national security." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about protecting soldiers in a combat zone. This was about preventing terrorist attacks that could kill hundreds or thousands of innocent Americans. "Why me, sir? There are other snipers with more experience." Major Thompson leaned forward. "Because this mission requires someone who can make an extremely difficult shot under conditions that would be impossible for most snipers. The intelligence indicates that al-Rashid rarely exposes himself, and when he does, it's usually at extreme range and challenging terrain." He pulled out a topographical map, showing mountainous terrain with elevations marked at various points. "The camp is located here, in a valley surrounded by peaks reaching over 12,000 feet. The only possible shooting position we've identified is on this ridge, at a range of nearly 2,000 yards. 2,000 yards. Sarah had never attempted a shot at that distance, even in training. At that range, dozens of factors could affect bullet trajectory, from air density at high altitude to the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation. "Sir, that's beyond the effective range of any standard sniper rifle. Which is why you'll be using experimental equipment," the major replied. "A new rifle system designed specifically for extreme long-range shooting. You'll have 2 weeks to train with it before deployment." The next 2 weeks were the most intensive of Sarah's military career. The new rifle system was unlike anything she had used before. Equipped with advanced ballistic computers and environmental sensors that could calculate shooting solutions for extreme ranges. But even with the technology, making accurate shots at 2,000 yards required skills that pushed the boundaries of human capability. The training took place at a remote facility in the mountains of Colorado, where the high altitude simulated the conditions she would face on her mission. Sarah spent hours each day practicing with the new equipment, gradually extending her range until she could consistently hit targets at 1,800 yards. Her instructor for the advanced training was Colonel James Mitchell, a legendary sniper with decades of experience. He had been brought out of retirement specifically to prepare Sarah for this mission. "The technology will help," he told her during one of their training sessions, "but at these extreme ranges, it still comes down to fundamental marksmanship skills and understanding your environment." Sarah learned to read wind patterns at multiple altitudes, calculate the effects of air density and temperature changes, and account for the minute but measurable influence of the Earth's rotation on her bullet's flight path. It was the most challenging training she had ever undertaken. "Remember," Colonel Mitchell emphasized repeatedly, "at 2,000 yards, you're not just shooting at a target. You're conducting a precision engineering exercise where every variable must be calculated perfectly." After 2 weeks of training, Sarah felt as ready as she could be for the mission, but she also understood that no amount of training could fully prepare her for the psychological pressure of making such a shot when lives depended on it. The insertion was conducted by a small CIA team that specialized in covert operations in denied territories. Sarah found herself parachuting into mountainous terrain at night, carrying the specialized rifle system and enough equipment to survive for several days if extraction was delayed. The landing zone was 15 miles from the target location, requiring a grueling cross-country movement through terrain that reached elevations above 11,000 feet. Sarah's physical conditioning was tested to its limits as she navigated through snow and ice toward her objective. After 2 days of movement, she reached the ridge that would serve as her shooting position. The view was breathtaking. A valley spread out below her with the terrorist training camp visible in the distance. Through her scope, she could see multiple buildings and training areas where al-Rashid was conducting his deadly instruction. Sarah spent another day observing the camp's routines, identifying patterns in the terrorists' movements and locating al-Rashid's probable location. Intelligence had been accurate. He rarely exposed himself, and when he did, it was usually for just a few seconds. On the 4th day, she saw her opportunity. Al-Rashid emerged from the main building and walked toward an outdoor training area where he would be exposed for approximately 30 seconds. The range was exactly 1,847 yards, measured by her laser rangefinder. Sarah settled into her shooting position, her specialized rifle resting on a bipod that had been precisely adjusted for the angle and terrain. She activated the ballistic computer, inputting environmental data that had been collected over the past several hours. Wind speed at her position, 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure, 24.89 inches of mercury. Air density, 78% of sea level. The ballistic computer calculated the shooting solution, displaying the precise aiming point on her scope's heads-up display. But Sarah knew that even with all the technology, the shot would ultimately depend on her ability to execute perfect marksmanship fundamentals at an unprecedented range. Al-Rashid appeared in her scope, moving slowly across the training area. Sarah could see him clearly at high magnification, noting his confident bearing and the way other terrorists deferred to him. This was definitely her target. She controlled her breathing, settled the crosshairs according to the ballistic computer's solution, and began applying pressure to the trigger. At this range, the bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, requiring her to account for his movement during that time. Sarah squeezed the trigger smoothly, sending the specially designed bullet on its long journey across the valley. Through her scope, she watched and waited, counting the seconds. 3 seconds later, she saw Al-Rashid stumble and fall. The shot had found its mark, eliminating one of the world's most dangerous terrorist snipers from a distance that many would have considered impossible. But her mission wasn't complete. Intelligence had indicated that Al-Rashid's death would trigger emergency procedures at the camp, potentially leading to the immediate deployment of trained terrorist snipers toward their targets in America. As Sarah watched through her scope, the camp erupted into activity. She had additional targets to eliminate before they could escape and carry out their planned attacks. Over the next hour, Sarah methodically engaged multiple targets as they attempted to evacuate the camp. Her specialized rifle and training allowed her to eliminate 12 terrorist snipers before they could disappear into the surrounding mountains. As she finally began her movement toward the extraction point, Sarah realized she had just completed the most significant mission of her career. From a former combat medic to a sniper capable of eliminating threats at unprecedented ranges, she had traveled a path that few could have imagined. The extraction helicopter found her at the designated point 3 days later. As they flew toward safety, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had risen from treating wounded soldiers to becoming one of America's most capable snipers, earning the respect of the SEALs and proving that determination and skill could overcome any obstacle. The mission remained classified, but word of her extraordinary shooting spread quietly through the special operations community. Sarah Martinez had become a legend among America's elite warriors, proving that sometimes the most unlikely heroes rise to meet the